October 14th, 2017. The air in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine. For Marcus and Emily Thorne, it was a day of shared escape. He was a widower, a weathered geologist with a quiet intensity, and she, his vibrant 17-year-old daughter, a high school senior with a passion for photography and a spirit that seemed to buzz with life. This annual father-daughter trip was their sacred ritual, a pilgrimage to the wilderness that had always been their sanctuary. They had planned a 2-day hike along a seldom-used trail deep into the park's heart. Their last communication was a grainy photo Emily sent to her mother-in-law, an image of Marcus, smiling slightly, standing beside a thicket of rhododendrons, the morning sun filtering through the canopy. The caption simply read, "First leg complete. Phone service is spotty. See you soon." Those were the last words anyone would ever receive from them. The Thorne family's initial reaction was one of minor concern, not alarm. It was the wilderness, after all. Cell service was notoriously unreliable. But as hours bled into a day, and a day into a second, the anxiety began to curdle into a cold dread. They were experienced hikers. They had prepared for every eventuality. A 2-day trip was a simple, well-trodden path for them. A search party was dispatched on the morning of October 17th, a small, professional team led by a veteran park ranger named David Cole. They started at the last known location, the trailhead where the Thornes' vehicle was parked, a dark green Ford Explorer with mud-splattered tires and an empty roof rack. The silence of the forest seemed to mock them, vast and impenetrable. The first days of the search were a grim, methodical sweep. Helicopters with thermal sensors crisscrossed the skies, their rotors a distant thrumming that broke the forest's solemn quiet. Ground teams, a mix of park rangers and local volunteers, moved in a grid pattern, their shouts echoing into the hollow expanse. They found nothing. No misplaced gear, no scuff marks on a rock, no torn piece of clothing snagged on a branch. It was as if the Thornes had simply dissolved into the landscape, absorbed by the ancient, indifferent earth. David Cole felt a growing unease. He had seen countless lost hikers, but their stories always left some kind of trail. A broken compass, a discarded water bottle, a faint footprint in the mud. The sheer lack of evidence was unprecedented. The search was eventually scaled back, and then, after 2 harrowing weeks, called off. The Thornes were declared missing, and the case grew cold, a file gathering dust in a ranger station office. For 5 years, the Thorne family lived in a state of suspended grief. They held on to a sliver of hope, a desperate, irrational belief that Marcus and Emily were somewhere, somehow, waiting to be found. But the forest held its secrets close, offering no whispers, no clues. The memory of Emily's vibrant smile and Marcus's calm demeanor faded, replaced by the stark, official photographs that graced missing persons posters. The Great Smoky Mountains, once a place of joy and solace for them, had become a tomb, an impassive monument to their loss. The passage of time did little to dull the pain. The seasons changed, the leaves turned from green to fiery red, then fell to carpet the forest floor, only to be reborn in the spring. But the Thornes were still gone. The case was a ghost story, a cautionary tale whispered around campfires, a mystery that seemed destined to remain unsolved. The park itself, so beautiful and inviting, began to feel like something else entirely, a place of dread, a silent witness to an unspeakable tragedy. And then, 5 years and 2 days after their disappearance, the silence was shattered. 2 young amateur archaeologists, a couple from Knoxville named Sarah and Ben, were exploring a remote, unmarked area of the park, a place rumored to contain relics from a long-lost settlement. They were not looking for the missing hikers. The Thorne story, for them, was a piece of local folklore, a forgotten tragedy. They were looking for history, for the echoes of a past civilization. They were searching for a different kind of truth. They were not on a marked trail, but were following a faint game path that snaked through a dense thicket, drawn by a peculiar rock formation that looked like a cairn. They had been drawn to this spot by a map passed down from an old park historian, a hand-drawn sketch that hinted at a forgotten burial ground. They had no idea that they were about to unearth not just history, but a modern-day horror. It was a cold, gray afternoon, the kind of day that seems to hold its breath. Sarah, a meticulous and patient woman, was sifting through the leaf litter at the base of the rock formation when her metal detector gave a faint, intermittent beep. It was not the strong, confident signal of a buried coin or a piece of forgotten metal, but a wavering, ghost-like pulse. She knelt down and began to clear away the debris with a small hand trowel, a meticulous, almost reverential process. Her hand brushed against something hard, something unnatural. She dug deeper, her breath a plume of white in the cold air. The object she uncovered was not a piece of a forgotten pot or a rusted tool. It was a small, plastic case about the size of a paperback book, sealed with a thick layer of mud and roots. It was a GPS unit of the kind used by hikers to mark waypoints and track their progress. Her hands trembled as she carefully wiped away the grime, revealing the faded brand name. It was a model that had been discontinued years ago, but she knew what it was. Her heart hammered in her chest. She called to Ben, her voice a hushed, disbelieving whisper. He came to her side, his face a mask of confusion that quickly morphed into shock as he recognized the device. The GPS unit was a relic from the past, a silent witness to a tragedy that had gone unseen. They tried to turn it on, but the battery was dead. With an almost sacred reverence, they placed the GPS in a Ziploc bag, their archaeological curiosity now replaced by a profound, chilling sense of responsibility. They had not found a piece of history. They had found a piece of a crime scene. And with that single, unassuming object, the ghost story of the Thorns was about to be resurrected, not as a memory, but as a living, breathing nightmare. The discovery of the GPS unit was a seismic event, a jolt that reverberated through the quiet corridors of the Park Service and the Thorn family's fragile, 5-year-old grief. Ranger David Cole, now a grizzled veteran with a tired look in his eyes, was the first to be notified. He drove to the park headquarters, the familiar winding roads feeling foreign and menacing under the weight of this new information. He met Sarah and Ben, their faces pale with a mix of excitement and terror. The GPS unit was small, unassuming, yet held the potential to unlock a story that had been buried for half a decade. Cole took the device and, with the help of a forensic technician, carefully extracted the memory card. The process was painstaking, a delicate surgical operation performed in a sterile lab, with the ghosts of the Thorns hovering in the air. The data on the card was corrupted, but not lost. The technician, working with a quiet intensity, managed to salvage the last 5 recorded waypoints, a digital breadcrumb trail left by the Thorns. The final point was marked with the time and date. October 15th, 2017, 3:42 p.m. The waypoints showed a deviation from the Thorns' planned route. They had not been following the marked trail, but had instead veered off into a dense, almost impenetrable part of the forest, a place that was not meant for casual hikers. The path they took was not a game trail or a shortcut. It was a deliberate, serpentine course that led them deeper and deeper into the wilderness, away from any established route. This new information was a complete contradiction to everything they knew about the Thorns. Marcus was an experienced geologist, a man who knew the park better than most rangers. He would never have strayed so far from a known path without a very specific reason. This new, darker line of inquiry began to take shape. The Thorns' disappearance was not a case of a simple hiking accident. It was something else entirely. The GPS data, combined with a meticulous re-examination of the original case file, began to paint a disturbing picture. The waypoints ended at a specific location, a deep ravine about 2 miles from where the GPS unit was found. The ravine was a place of natural concealment, a topographical blind spot that had been overlooked during the initial aerial search. This was the new search area, a place that held the promise of answers and the terror of confirmation. The second search operation was a different beast altogether. It was smaller, more focused, and driven by a grim determination. The air was charged with a heavy, palpable tension. Cole and his team, guided by the GPS data, descended into the ravine. The forest here was a different kind of quiet. The canopy was thick, blotting out the sun, and the air was still and heavy. The ground was treacherous, littered with fallen trees and slick with moss. It was here at the bottom of the ravine, at the final GPS waypoint, that they found it. Not a body, but a makeshift campsite, crudely constructed and partially collapsed. It was a lean-to made of fallen branches and a tarp. Inside, they found a small, rusted cook stove and a partially burnt sleeping bag. The sleeping bag was a distinctive shade of royal blue, a detail that had been listed in the original missing persons report. The discovery sent a jolt of ice through Cole's veins. They had been here. The Thorns had survived the initial stages of their ordeal. But what had happened next? A methodical search of the surrounding area yielded no further clues. No bones, no clothing, no sign of a struggle. The campsite was a ghost, a hollow monument to a last stand. But as they were preparing to leave, one of the search team members, a young ranger, noticed a peculiar object wedged between two rocks, a glint of metal in the dark earth. He carefully extracted it. It was a small, ornate, silver locket, engraved with the initials E.T. Emily Thorne's locket. The back was hinged, but it was corroded shut. The discovery of the locket was a profound, emotional blow. It was the first tangible piece of a person they had found in 5 years. And it raised a terrifying question. If Emily had been here, and if her locket had been found, what had happened to the rest of her? The location of the locket, separate from the campsite, and the strange, deliberate path they had taken, shattered the initial theory of a simple accident. The Thorns hadn't been lost. They had been running from something. Or someone. The narrative began to shift, moving from a tragic accident to a criminal investigation, a dark and terrifying puzzle with missing pieces that were starting to surface from the unforgiving earth. The forest, once a passive witness, had now become an accomplice, holding the secrets of a final, desperate flight. A new, more chilling hunt was underway, no longer for a lost family, but for the ghost of an attacker, a hunter who had turned the wilderness into a deadly, silent stage. The discovery of the GPS data and the locket re-energized the investigation, but it also plunged it into a much darker realm. The initial theory of a simple hiking accident, a tragic misstep in the vast wilderness, was now completely debunked. The new evidence pointed to a far more sinister scenario. The Thorns had been the prey, and the forest, their hunter's domain. The path they had taken, the one marked by the GPS waypoints, was not a mistake. It was a desperate, panicked flight. The waypoints showed a frantic, zigzagging course, a flight from something unseen, something or someone that had driven them deep into the ravine, a place of natural concealment where they had hoped to hide. The locket, a small, intimate piece of Emily's life, was found not at the campsite, but about 50 feet away, near a small, rocky outcrop. It was a detail that spoke of a struggle, a moment of chaos, a piece of evidence left behind in a desperate moment. The corrosion on the locket was so severe that the forensic team had to use a specialized X-ray machine to see if there was anything inside. The images revealed a single, faded photograph, a picture of Marcus and Emily, taken years earlier, smiling in front of the same mountain range that had now swallowed them. The image, frozen in time, was a poignant and heartbreaking detail. The new information, however, only deepened the mystery. Who or would have been chasing them? And why? A new, far more extensive search was launched, this time led by the FBI, who had been brought in due to the nature of the now presumed crime. This was no longer a rescue mission. It was a search for a burial site, for a perpetrator, for a motive. The search grid was expanded, but the focus was on the area around the ravine, a place now considered a potential crime scene. The search team, armed with cadaver dogs and ground-penetrating radar, combed the area with a grim, surgical precision. The forest floor was meticulously examined, inch by inch, and every rock, every overturned log, was treated as a potential clue. For weeks, they found nothing. The earth remained silent. The forest, so quick to offer up a locket and a GPS, had once again closed its fist, holding its secrets tight. The emotional toll was immense. For the Thorne family, the renewed hope had been a double-edged sword, bringing with it a fresh wave of fear and uncertainty. They had 5 years to come to terms with the idea of an accident. Now, they were forced to grapple with the possibility of a violent, unthinkable act. Their grief had been a quiet, private affair. Now, it was a public spectacle, a morbid curiosity for a hungry media. The tension within the search team was palpable. David Cole, who had been haunted by this case for 5 years, was a man possessed, his every move fueled by a relentless desire for answers. He believed the Thornes had been victims of a random act of violence, a chance encounter with a lone predator. But a search of the park's criminal history yielded no similar cases. There were no serial killers known to operate in the Smokies, no records of violent assaults on hikers. The idea of a random, lone wolf attacker was the most logical explanation, but it felt hollow, incomplete. And then, on a cold, drizzly morning, a new piece of evidence was found, a discovery so peculiar and so unsettling that it would once again change the entire narrative. A park volunteer, an elderly man with a keen eye for detail, was sifting through the undergrowth about a quarter-mile from the Thornes campsite when he spotted it, a small, dark, oblong object partially buried in the mud. He carefully retrieved it. It was a hunting arrowhead, crudely made and chipped, a relic from a bygone era. It was not a modern, manufactured arrowhead, but one made of dark, crystalline stone of the kind used by ancient peoples. It seemed out of place, an anachronism in a modern tragedy. But as the volunteer turned it over, he saw something else. Tightly wrapped around the base of the arrowhead, held in place by a thin, almost invisible sinew, was a small, white plastic cylinder. He carefully unwrapped the sinew, revealing the object. It was a memory stick, the kind used for digital storage. The combination was bizarre, a strange melding of ancient hunting technology and modern digital data. The arrowhead, itself a symbol of an old kind of violence, had been used to conceal a piece of technology, a flash drive that was a product of the 21st century. The discovery was met with a mix of disbelief and morbid curiosity. The forensic team, now operating with a renewed sense of purpose, carefully examined the arrowhead. The rock it was made of was obsidian, a volcanic glass not native to the area. This meant the arrowhead had been brought here from somewhere else, a detail that was both confusing and deeply unsettling. But the real key to the puzzle lay within the memory stick. It was a digital treasure trove, a trove of information that promised to reveal the full, terrifying story of the Thornes' last moments. The data was not encrypted, but it was corrupted. The forensic technician, a young woman named Dr. Lena Petrov, worked for 3 days straight, her fingers flying over her keyboard, her eyes glued to the screen, piecing together the fragmented data. The files were not photographs or documents. They were audio files. The moment Dr. Petrov heard the first few seconds of the first recording, a chilling sound of heavy breathing and the rustling of leaves, she knew she had found something more than just a clue. She had found a first-hand account of a living nightmare. The memory stick contained a series of audio files, a total of 17 recordings, each one a chilling, minute-by-minute chronicle of the Thornes' final hours. The audio was captured by a small, high-sensitivity microphone built into Emily Thorne's camera, a detail that had been overlooked in the initial investigation. The camera itself had been submerged in the mud, its casing cracked, but the microphone and the memory stick, protected by a waterproof seal, had survived. The first audio file, dated October 15th, 2017, 10:15 a.m., was the sound of Emily and Marcus talking. Their voices were light and jovial, discussing the trail and the beautiful scenery. The rustling of leaves, the chirping of birds, the gentle thud of their footsteps on the forest floor. It was a soundscape of a perfect day. But as the recordings progressed, the tone changed. At 11:32 a.m., Marcus's voice took on a new, more serious tone. He mentioned a strange sound, a faint, rhythmic crunching of leaves, as if someone were following them. Emily's voice, once so full of life, was tinged with a slight tremor of fear. "Dad, do you think it's just another hiker?" she asked. "I don't know, Em," he replied, his voice a low whisper. "Just keep walking. Don't look back." The next several audio files were a record of their frantic flight. The sounds of their heavy breathing, the frantic rustling of their jackets, the rapid thud of their feet on the ground. Interspersed with their panicked whispers were the chilling sounds of their pursuer, the rhythmic, almost mechanical crunch of footsteps, the snapping of twigs, the guttural sound of a man's breathing, close and getting closer. At one point, Marcus's voice was filled with a mix of terror and defiance. "Don't follow us. We have nothing," he shouted into the air. The only response was a low, menacing grunt. The audio files were a first-person account of a living nightmare, a terrifying game of cat and mouse in the unforgiving wilderness. At 3:42 p.m., the time of the last GPS waypoint, the audio files recorded a different kind of sound. It was the sound of a struggle, a brief, violent commotion. Emily screamed, a short, piercing sound that was cut off abruptly. There was the thud of something heavy hitting the ground, followed by a series of low grunts and the sound of something being dragged. The last sound on the final recording was the faint, muffled thud of a shovel hitting dirt. The audio files were a chilling and complete record of their deaths, a sonic testament to a horrific act of violence. But who was this man? The voice on the recordings was muffled, but the heavy, rhythmic breathing was distinctive. Dr. Petrov, using a specialized audio analysis software, managed to isolate and enhance the voice. The software created a digital imprint of the man's vocal patterns, a ghostly fingerprint of a killer. The audio analysis also revealed another chilling detail. In a few of the recordings, faint and barely audible under the sound of the wind, was the sound of a very specific kind of bird call. It was the call of a Swainson's thrush, a migratory bird that only passes through the Great Smoky Mountains National Park in late summer and early autumn. The presence of the bird call, combined with the detailed audio record, was enough to convince the investigators that the audio was not a fake. It was a brutal, unedited record of a real event. But the most terrifying discovery was still to come. The arrowhead, the anachronistic piece of obsidian, was not just a strange curiosity. The forensic analysis revealed minute traces of blood on its surface. The blood was human, but it was not from Marcus or Emily Thorne. It was from a third person, an unknown individual. This discovery, combined with the presence of the memory stick, shattered the initial theory of a random act of violence. The arrowhead was not a murder weapon. It was a tool, a strange and terrifying calling card left behind by a calculating and methodical killer. It was a message, a cryptic and unsettling clue left for future discovery. The pieces of the puzzle began to click into place, forming a terrifying picture of a premeditated, ritualistic act. The killer had not just happened upon the Thorns. He had been hunting them. The Thorns had veered off their path not because they were lost, but because they had been deliberately led off it, lured by a predator who knew the park intimately. And the presence of the blood on the arrowhead suggested that the Thorns were not the first victims. The Thorn case was no longer just a missing persons file or a murder investigation. It was a hunt for a serial killer, a predator who used the vast, silent wilderness as his hunting grounds. The ghost story of the Thorns had become a horrifying reality, a dark tale of a modern-day hunter with ancient, primal instincts. The audio files, the arrowhead, the memory stick, they were all a part of a macabre and chilling narrative, a story of a hidden monster who had been stalking the peaceful trails of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions and a growing list of victims. The hunt for the truth had just begun, but the first terrifying clues had been laid bare by the silent, unforgiving earth. The new evidence, the meticulously analyzed audio files, the bizarre obsidian arrowhead, and the traces of a third person's blood, shattered the Thorn case wide open. The initial narrative of a tragic accident had been replaced by a much darker, more profound horror. This was not a random act of violence. This was the work of a methodical, ritualistic killer, a predator who had been operating in the silent, sprawling wilderness for years, perhaps even decades, completely undetected. The FBI, now fully immersed in the investigation, used the unique digital fingerprint of the killer's voice to cross-reference with existing databases. The results were chilling. The vocal patterns matched a man who had been a suspect in two other missing persons cases, both of which had occurred within the park boundaries and had been dismissed as hiking accidents due to a lack of evidence. The first case was a solo female hiker who disappeared in 2005. The second was a young couple on their honeymoon in 2011. In both cases, the victims' vehicles were found at a trailhead, and their trails vanished without a trace, much like the Thorns. The pattern was now undeniable. This wasn't a one-time event. It was a series of premeditated, well-executed murders, a grim collection of unsolved disappearances that had been hiding in plain sight. The killer was a ghost, a specter who moved through the forest with a sinister intimacy, a hunter who used the very land as his weapon. The arrowhead itself was a crucial piece of the puzzle. Dr. Petrov, the forensic expert, discovered a specific kind of mineral on the surface of the obsidian, a type of volcanic rock found only in a very remote, specific region of Oregon. This detail, combined with the audio analysis, suggested that the killer was not a local, but an outsider, a man who traveled to the park specifically to hunt. He was a professional, a serial killer with a signature, a sick ritual that involved the use of an ancient weapon and the leaving behind of a macabre, high-tech calling card. The presence of the memory stick, the camera, and the locket all pointed to a deliberate, almost theatrical display of power. The killer wasn't just hiding his crimes. He was documenting them, a twisted act of curation and control. He was leaving a breadcrumb trail, not for the police to find, but as a silent, chilling monument to his dominance over his victims and the investigators. The audio files were not just a record of a murder. They were a self-made confession, a trophy taken from his prey, a macabre memento. The case, now dubbed the Smoky Mountain Hunter, became a high-profile manhunt, a massive operation that involved hundreds of agents and rangers. But the killer, a man who had been operating with impunity for so long, had a profound understanding of the forest. He was a ghost in the woods, an expert at evading capture. He knew the hidden trails, the obscure ravines, the places where a person could disappear without a trace. And the public's fascination with the case, fueled by the leaked details of the horrific audio recordings, created a sense of collective dread. The Great Smoky Mountains, a place of natural beauty and serenity, was now seen as a hunting ground, a place where a monster resided, a constant reminder of the thin, fragile line between civilization and the wild, and the violence that can exist in the spaces between. The Thorn family, once a beacon of quiet grief, was now thrust into the center of a media storm. The father, a quiet geologist who had lost everything, and a vibrant daughter who had been silenced so brutally, were the faces of a national nightmare. Their story, once a private tragedy, had become a public warning, a stark and brutal lesson about the dangers that can lurk in the most beautiful of places. The lack of a body continued to haunt the investigators. They believed the killer had disposed of the bodies in a remote, inaccessible location, a final act of desecration and control. The search efforts were intensified, but the forest refused to yield its final secrets. The silence of the earth was the killer's final accomplice, a vast, impassive co-conspirator. The case remains open, the Smoky Mountain Hunter, a ghost in the annals of true crime. The investigators have a digital fingerprint, a vocal pattern, and a strange, ancient calling card, but they still do not have a name, a face, or a final resting place for the victims. The mystery of the Thorns' disappearance, once a sad and simple tale of a hiking accident, has morphed into a horrifying epic, a brutal narrative of a calculated predator who preyed on the innocence of nature lovers and used the very land they sought to explore as a tomb. The story of the Thorns is a dark, cautionary tale. It is a reminder that the wilderness, for all its beauty and serenity, can also be a place of unimaginable darkness, a silent, unforgiving stage for a modern-day monster. The hunt for the truth continues, but the forest keeps its secrets close, leaving behind only the ghostly echoes of a father and daughter who went for a hike and never came home, their last moments forever frozen in the chilling silence of a memory stick in the cold, unyielding earth. The case of the thorns and the revelation of the Smoky Mountain Hunter sent shockwaves far beyond the quiet beauty of the national park. It was a story that transcended a simple crime and became a modern-day legend, a chilling tale whispered around campfires and debated in true crime forums. The media, hungry for every new detail, sensationalized the findings, transforming the solemn tragedy into a morbid spectacle. The Thorns, once a private family, were now figures of a national nightmare, their final moments dissected and replayed in the public consciousness. But the sensationalism did little to advance the actual investigation. The killer had vanished as completely as his victims. The voice print, while a monumental clue, was not enough for a positive identification. The blood on the arrowhead, while confirmed to be human, did not match any DNA in the national databases. It was a ghostly trace of a previous victim, a silent witness to a prior act of violence. The trail had gone cold again, leaving behind a profound sense of injustice and a palpable feeling of dread. The silence of the forest, once a source of peace, was now a source of terror. The park, once a sanctuary, was now a crime scene. But as the manhunt stalled, new information began to surface from the most unexpected places. An old, retired park ranger, a man with a photographic memory and a knack for remembering obscure details, came forward. He remembered a man, a loner, who had worked as a seasonal trail maintenance contractor for several years in the late 2000s and early 2010s. This man, a quiet and private individual, had a strange fascination with ancient hunting techniques and primitive survival skills. The ranger remembered him talking about how the ancient peoples knew the land better than anyone, how they could move through the forest without leaving a trace. He remembered the man's odd, almost obsessive collection of handmade arrowheads and tools. The man's name was David Cole. No, not the ranger David Cole who had led the initial investigation. This was a different David Cole, a man who had left the Park Service years before the Thorns' disappearance. The coincidence was unsettling, a cruel twist of fate. A quick search of the new David Cole's background revealed a series of disturbing facts. He had been a troubled child, a loner with a history of violence and a deep-seated hatred for authority. He had no permanent address, no digital footprint, no social media presence. He was a ghost, a perfect phantom for a perfect crime. He fit the profile of the Smoky Mountain Hunter in every possible way. But there was no evidence to link him directly to the Thorns. He had left the park years before the murders. The FBI's best theory was that he had returned to his old hunting grounds, to the place where he had perfected his gruesome craft. But without a direct link, without a body, without a confession, they were at a dead end. And so the case remains open, a perpetual enigma in the annals of true crime. The Thorns' final moments, captured on a tiny microphone and stored on a memory stick, are a chilling testament to a living nightmare. The obsidian arrowhead, a strange relic from a long-lost past, is a silent witness to a modern-day horror. The vast, silent wilderness of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park holds its secrets close, its beauty a fragile veneer over a dark and terrifying truth. The ghost of the Thorns and the specter of the Smoky Mountain Hunter still linger in the air, a perpetual mystery that serves as a grim reminder of the darkness that can lurk in the most beautiful of places.